Om. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam, Trailokyam Sacharacharam, Tatpadam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Twameva Mata Chapita Twameva, Twameva Bandhuscha Sakha Twameva, Twameva Vidya Dravidam Twameva, Twameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva, Twameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Ho. Om Sahana Mavatu, Sahanao Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So where are we in our text?
We're on the middle of page 47.
Okay, and we do not have Aditi this morning, so we're only going to do English, and Mark has consented to help us out.
Okay. He who is without affection on any side does not rejoice or loathe as he gains good or evil. His wisdom is firmly set, from the Bhagavad Gita. Affection, sneha, is the particular type of mental transformation concerning others caused by tamaguna, which, when it takes place, causes superimposition of others' loss and gain on himself. Good, subhaha, means pleasing things such as one's wife, etc., rejoicing. Abdinaha is that mental state which leads one to extol those wife, etc. Here, the object of extolling wife, etc., is not to inspire others. Hence, it is futile, and the mental state, joy, which causes this, is a form of tamaguna. Evil, ashubhaha, is displeasing things, such as acquirements, etc., of another, which brings about jealousy. Loathing, dveshaha, is that mental state which induces one to detract another with acquirements. This is also of tamaguna because of the futility of such disparagement, since this is not aimed at stopping anybody from anything. These being made of tamaguna, how can they happen to one with discrimination?
Yes. So these, here he's done an exegesis of this particular verse from Gita. We'll look at some of the salient points. These are ideas we've covered many times. There are two words that are usually translated as love in Sanskrit, sniyati and lubyati. Sneha here being a form of sniyati. both have negative connotations. Here, sniyati means, how can I frame this? Undue affection for something, kind of an attachment. We might in a modern day talk about codependence. It's not the selfless kind of love that prema is. Lubyati means kind of oily or smarmy. So what he's talking about is these ideas of attachment for things or aversion for things are all rooted in the idea that the people, places, things in the phenomenal world have inherent joy-giving or misery-producing qualities. And I'm fond of the saying that Nisargadatta Maharaj says, worldly happiness and worldly suffering are essentially the same thing. As long as I imbue something in the phenomenal world with joy-giving properties, it will eventually make me suffer. And of course, the antithesis is true also, where I am convinced I have hate, I have dvesha, aversion for something out there, that I've imbued it with all of this power. And here he's saying all of this is rooted in the non-apprehension of truth. Chidananda Rupaham, my form is bliss consciousness, as Shankara says. I just use the phenomena of the world to induce the mind state free from its projecting power. Next verse.
When again he withdraws his senses from the objects of sense on every side, as a tortoise withdraws in its limbs into its shell, then his knowledge is firmly set, also from the Bhagavad Gita. It has been said by the previous two stanzas that in a Sthita Prajna, even when he is not in profound meditation, there is an absence of all the tamasa transformations. And when in profound meditation, there are no transformations at all. How then, the stanza implies, can there be any doubt of tamasa transformations?
So he's referring to profound meditation and samadhi. So when the yogi withdraws his attention into the deepest meditation, then the personal sense of self is gone, the perception of the phenomenal world is gone. That it becomes very clear. The mind is essential for misery. It is not essential for happiness. And even if we do not have samadhi, we prove it every night in deep sleep. Now, I haven't seen the Sanskrit here, whether or not he's talking about uparati, which is the word that we get in Viveka Chudamani, or pratyahara, which is the word that we get in the Raja Yoga tradition. Both mean sense withdrawal. But I am fond of what Shankara says about uparati and Viveka Chudamani. He says the best uparati is when we're functioning in the world and the sense objects do not create vrittis in the mind. That's rooted in this deep understanding. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Brahman alone is real. The phenomenal world is illusory. When we see a mirage, when we see an optical illusion, may be interesting to see, but no power to cause us either to extrovert with attachment or aversion. That's the point that he's getting at. So, in my opinion, it doesn't just mean deep samadhi. A man or woman of wisdom moves through the world with this understanding, sarvam kalvidam brahma. All this is verily just the play of consciousness. Next one.
The objects of sense turn away from the abstinent man, but the longing for them remains. But his longing also ceases who sees the supreme. Some objects, causing pleasure and pain, are brought about by the prarabdha karma alone, such as rising of the moon, darkness, etc. Others, such as house, land, etc., by the help of human efforts. The rising of the moon, etc., cease to exist during the abstract meditation when all the senses are completely withdrawn and by no other way. But the house, etc., cease even without samadhi. Aharanam, accomplishing, ahara, bring to pass, is udyogaha, strenuous and continuous endeavor. The house and the like turn away from the unenterprising. Rasa means mental thirst, etc. For example, the strong desire for the house, etc., remains. This longing for the sense objects of little joy ceases to be finding the self, which is bliss absolute. The Upanishad has it, what shall we achieve through children, we who have attained this self, this world?
So here he's talking about initially the false notion that I can escape the tyranny of longing by getting rid of the objects. And Krishna here says the person who gets rid of all of the objects of desire but allows the desire to remain behind is verily a hypocrite. So if we go back to Gita in the second chapter, very first part, Arjun's going to run away from the battle. He's going to go off to the forest and meditate. Krishna knows that this is phony renunciation. He's going to sit there in the forest thinking he's meditating, and all he's going to think about is the battle he isn't fighting. But the second half of the Gita shloka, but his desire leaves him on seeing the supreme. This is an indication of what I call the ruthless rule of the mind. The mind will return to the experience that's given it the greatest joy. There's no help for it. And I always follow that with, thank God, God is the most beloved. So in the end, we're not so much healed by what we turn from as by what we turn to. Let me give you a worldly example that I use in the basic class all the time. If when you were a child you had a tricycle, you pedaled your tricycle around the driveway or down the sidewalk, You loved your tricycle. And then as you got a little bit older, perhaps your parents got you a bicycle. Oh, that was the greatest thing in the world. Now you go all the way down to the end of the block. What happened to your love, your attachment to the tricycle? Gone. Sits there in the corner of the garage or down to a younger sibling. Why? Because the bicycle brings you more freedom. It brings you more joy. This is how we leave the world. Now, sometimes we definitely do need to get some space between the objects of desire. The example of effective recovery is the clearest example. If you have a problem with drugs or alcohol, gambling, chances are you need to stop the activity. You need to practice abstinence. But abstinence itself is not enough. You have to give the mind something more rewarding. These programs talk about how the drugs or the alcohol or the gambling were not really my problem. They were my solution. They were my solution to the fundamental discontent of the mind. And the way to be free from the tyranny of that is to provide the mind with a spiritual experience. Now, sometimes we're unable to practice abstinence. So, like, let's say you abuse food, people cannot stop eating. So, what Vidyaranya is saying is, as we deepen our meditation, yes, we practice vairagya, but also endeavoring to absorb the mind and the self. Abhyasa vairagya cha, Patanjali says in Yoga Sutra. Practice, but also intense renunciation. The two together. And it's not so much that we leave the world, but the world leaves us. I just don't have an interest in it anymore. So I have a new playground. Something that truly satisfies the mind. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
The turbulent senses, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, do carry off by force the mind of even a discerning man, ever striving after perfection. Having brought all those senses under control, he should absorbedly concentrate on me. For he whose senses are under control, his knowledge is firmly set. In spite of his attempts to shun personal efforts and to realize the self, there may be chance negligence. To avoid this, he should practice abstract meditation. So this is in answer to the question, how does he sit?
So here the idea is, yes, the projecting power of the mind, the force of the past is powerful. At the end of the 6th chapter of Gita, Arjuna is going to say, oh, Krishna, this controlling of the mind seems like trying to control the wind. And Krishna says it's true, but it is possible through practice. So the dosha, the defect that gets in the way, is our perfectionism. We have to be willing to be crappy yogis. We have to be willing at times to fail. Because we're going to. But the successful person is steadfast. When we can, return to the practice. The mind extroverts, don't beat yourself up and don't quit. Bring the mind back. Now, here's a secret. The mind prefers the familiar. It frequently prefers the familiar to the good. This is our problem. What we need to do is make subhecha, auspicious desire, familiar. So we set up a practice that we do every day. And in time, deep meditation will bring you joy. And its familiarity will allow us easily to return to the practice. So, especially in the beginning, our job is to make the good familiar. And we have that in worldly things over and over again. You hear somebody suggested to go to the gymnasium. You have to exercise if you want to feel better. And oh, I don't want to go to the gym. I went once and I hurt all over for days. But if you do it on a regular basis, in time, your body enjoys the exercise. The good becomes familiar. So this is the secret. This is the secret. Being steadfast. Not being discouraged if the mind extroverts. Keep bringing it back. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
When a man ponders the objects of sense, attachment to them is born. From attachment springs longing, and from longing, anger is produced. From anger comes bewilderment. From bewilderment, loss of memory. From loss of memory proceeds ruin of discrimination, and from ruin of discrimination, he perishes. In the absence of the practice of samadhi, how negligence takes place is described. Attachment, sangaha, means vicinity of the object of thought. Bewilderment, samohaha, means turning away from discrimination. Loss of memory, smriti brahmaha, means want of seeking the truth. The ruin of discrimination, buddhinasya, asha, means the inability of knowledge to liberate through obstacles formed out of opposite thoughts.
Is that the end of it?
Yes.
So here, again, the idea is if we cultivate this tuning up of the mind, this deep absorption into the self, here is another secret. We talk frequently about non-attachment, about detaching. People don't realize the mind's dharma is to attach. The problem is I've allowed my mind to attach to things that are impermanent, unreal, and temporary. When I do that, I get the bewilderment, the anger, the loss of discrimination, ultimately ruin and destruction. What is yoga? Yoga means union. What gets united with what? Now listen carefully. It's not that myself gets united with God. Nope. It's that the mind gets united with the self. So frequently, when I'm working with beginners, I'll have them do a check-in. And then I always ask them, well, how did you do with your meditation this week? Oh, I just didn't have time to get to it. I meditated a couple times this week. For how long? 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And inside I'm thinking, there's still too much tamoguna, still too much rajaguna. Mind is still too ignorant. It's still extroverting too much. One has to develop a mature practice. In Thursday night in Viveka Chudamani, we've been spending several weeks now on the importance of samadhi. Here, Vidyaranya is stressing the same notion. We need to be satisfied in the self by the self. Next verse.
But a man with a disciplined mind, moving among the sense objects with the senses under control and free from love and hate, attains to tranquility. Videya Atma, the self, the mind, which is subject to discipline, means the controlled mind. Prastam, purity, means free from hindrance. He who practices samadhi, although dealing with the objects through senses during the wakeful state, attains to the perfect purity by the force of samadhi impressions. This is an answer to, how does he move? Shita Prajna has been described in the following several verses.
So the idea herein is what Other scriptures term sahaja samadhi, natural or continuous samadhi. So, as the fruit of our nirvikalpa, what do I understand? When the mind returns, I know without a doubt I'm not a person. I'm that space of pure awareness. I know what is this world is nothing but consciousness, vibration held together by thought. It no longer has the power to fool me. So the highest state is not nirvikalpa. When the mind returns from nirvikalpa, we have this natural or continuous samadhi, meaning the mind stays home, it doesn't extrovert into the world. What do we mean by the mind? It doesn't mean the cessation of the flow of thought. Self-realization is not some state of insensibility. Yoga Vasishta reduces the mind to only three ideas. I feel like a person, I have a goal, and I have compulsory efforts toward that goal. That's the mind. That's what gets removed. Any thoughts on this? And that's what we practice. We practice removing that personal sense of self. We practice letting go of our belief in the reality of the phenomenal world. We give up kartavya, obligatory action, struggle. Let it be. Go with the flow. And then the world is no longer problematic for the person of steady wisdom. All right, next verse.
It may be asked that as means to the realization of the supreme truth, it is necessary to be free from love and hate, etc., and also, after the realization, to make it firmly set.
Is that all there is to it?
That's all there is.
Read it again. I didn't quite catch the very first part.
Okay. It may be asked that as means to the realization of the supreme truth, it is necessary to be free from love and hate, etc., and also, after the realization, to make it firmly set.
Okay, so this is a question that's been asked. Is this what I need to do? Be free from love and hate, etc. And then do I need to keep practicing this after realization dawns on the mind? Let's see what Vidyaranya responds.
Indeed so. But there is some distinction, and that has been pointed out by the author of the Shreyo Margaha. All that lead to the realization are to be brought about by effort. They are the means. When the knowledge becomes steady in him, those remain in him as intrinsic characteristics. This state of abiding self-knowledge is called the liberation in life, Jivan Mukti, wherein all sense of separateness is counteracted in consequence of the unhindered self-knowledge.
Yes. So in our time of doing sadhana, these practices of viveka, vairagya, shamari guna become the new tendencies of the mind. They counteract, they contradict ignorance, attachment, anger, revenge. They remain with the Sthita Prajna, the person of steady wisdom, the Jivan Mukta. Here he says, as the result of his past practices. I don't know. I think it's more of a result of his clear insight. I like what Ramana Maharshi said. Just as the ordinary person doesn't need to practice, I'm not a goat or a cow or a horse or a pig, but it's just the most obvious thing in the world. I have a human body. So also for the Jivan Mukta. There's never any doubt that he's a person. It's so very clear. His essential nature is Brahman. Now, does the occasional annoyance or appreciation of beauty arise in the mind? Of course. The Jivan Mukta will have preferences. But deep inside, shunya, empty, maunam, silence. The great Sufi master Hafiz has a wonderful metaphor. For you and me, perhaps when afflictions in the world arise, we're carried away like it's a hurricane. But for the person of steady wisdom, they're like little dust devils. They rise, they spin for a bit, and then they're gone. They no longer have the power to carry us away. Next verse.
Bhagava Bhaktaha, the true devotee of God, has been described in the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita by the Lord Krishna. He who hates none and is friendly and compassionate towards all, who is free from egoism and the sense of mine, even-minded in pain and pleasure, and patient, ever content, steady in meditation, self-controlled, resolute, and with his mind and understanding fixed on me, he who is thus devoted to me is dear to me. In the samadhi state, the mind is fixed on God. Hence, there cannot be any other thought. But when not in samadhi, though the mind thinks of the objects, has no feeling of happiness or sorrow because of the indifference. Thus, even-mindedness in pleasure and pain. Thus in the following stanzas, also, the pairs of opposites are to be understood.
So this idea of love or affection or devotion, what does it mean? In English, we just have the one word, love. I'm fond of the way in which the ancient Greeks looked at it. There's at least three words. There might even be a fourth or a fifth. But there's philios, brotherly love, the affection I have for a friend, a relative. There's eros, erotic love, very self-explanatory. But then there's agape or agape, which is the selfless love. This is the word that comes into the Latin caritas, which then comes into the English charity, doesn't mean just giving stuff to the poor. It means this love, this affection with no thought of return from that source. In yoga, the word we have is prema. Comes from the same root as priya, what is dear. Prema means this love, this devotion to the infinite. We don't normally use that word in terms of worldly interactions. A lover of the Lord is called a premi. This is the essence of the bhakti tradition. The great Abrahamic religions are bhakti yogas. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and soul and mind and strength. That's the first and greatest command. But what about my affection for the world? The practice that the tradition suggests has two elements to it. We take on what we call sakshi bhav, the attitude of the witness of your own mind. First, notice what it feels like to want something you don't have. It hurts. Yoga says there's no other suffering. So we are invited to pay attention to own our suffering. Ignorance will tell me I'm unhappy because I don't have what I want, or people aren't behaving. Yoga says I'm unhappy because I have kama, craving, spreha, longing, vancha, wanting, raga, passion for things, desha, aversion for other things. The cause is not out there. The cause is my sangraha, my attachments. So the invitation is to own my suffering. Do not walk around the world in delusion thinking it's because I don't have what I want. Then pay attention to what I call the point of pleasure. When desire and object of desire become one for a moment, the mind is freed from its craving. That's a taste. It's a kiss of the bliss of Brahman. But in my ignorance, I think it's in the object. That person makes me happy. This object makes me happy. This situation makes me happy. It's out there. I have superimposed my ananda onto a world of phenomena. Yoga says that's the Anandamaya Kosha. What you've actually done is have a taste of the bliss of your self nature in ignorance. You mean good food, beautiful music, and sex all do the same thing to my mind? Yes. But I get confused by the diversity of sensory experience. I've just used the people, places, things, and situation to induce the mind state free from longing. I call that pleasure, contentment, happiness, joy. It really is myself. So the ignorant person goes and eats ice cream and says, "Oh, that's such great ice cream." The yogi eats the same ice cream, experiences the same joy, but their understanding is, boy, that's stop my mind. Krishna, Krishna. Own your ananda. When I use the objects to induce the momentary experience of freedom from longing, that is a mediated experience. I use a medium to get there. Samadhi is a non-mediated experience. Because of my knowledge, I choose to let go of the world. The mind comes home, independent of the world. So those of us in ignorance, caught up in the desiring of things, it's like the person who's hitting himself on the head with a hammer. Why are you hitting yourself on the head with a hammer? Because it feels so good when I stop. I want this. I want that. I want this. Oh. I got what I want. Then I start up again. The yogi says, why don't you try putting the hammer down? Even if we don't have samadhi, we prove this every night. I don't know if any of the rest of you have had any difficulty sleeping because of the heat. But when we get a good night's sleep, oh, I feel so rested, so blissful. No object is causing the bliss of deep sleep. It is the absence of the individual and the perceived world. Mind is covered in ignorance. That's that 150. There's no Vikshepa Shakti. More attached we are to the world, and the more it delivers problems to us, the more we love deep sleep. You must have an agitated, projecting mind in order to be miserable. You do not need the mind in order to be happy. You do not need the world in order to be happy. Well, Jim, does that mean when I achieve samadhi, I'm just going to sit there and do nothing? I don't know. Your equipment will be impelled into activity from the force of the past. But there will no longer be ego prompted activity. What is ego prompted activity? I need this, that, and the other thing in order to be happy. It's gone. Any thoughts on this before we go on? Next verse.
He by whom the world is not troubled, and who is not troubled by the world, who is freed from joy, envy, fear, and anxiety, he is dear to me. It's a verse
That's the
from the
end of it.
Bhagavad Gita. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a verse from the Bhagavad Gita.
So here it's kind of interesting language. Krishna says he is dear to me. We have to understand that Ishvara, the Lord, Krishna, does not have favorites. So why does he use this language? If I go outside on a beautiful summer day in the Bay Area and I'm enjoying the beautiful weather, I may poetically say, oh, this, I am dear to the sun, I am dear to the breeze. Meaning I have propitiated the experience. We invoke the blessing by our own activity and choices. In reality, the sun or the breeze has no favorites. But if, on the other hand, I stay inside with the curtains drawn, don't go outside, the sun and the breeze have not withheld their blessing. I've just not invoked their blessing. Outside. So the grace of God is a constant. I like to say it's a beneficent universe that conspires for my well-being if I let it. And here Krishna says, how do I invoke this grace? So let's parse the ideas again. What's the first idea, Mark?
He by whom the world is not troubled.
So when I have that santosha, that contentment, that paramashanti, that supreme peace, I don't walk around with a fundamental sense of aggression. I'm not a jerk. So the world is no longer agitated by me, nor I by the world. Now there's an even deeper idea here. As the mind of the Jivan Mukti, Jivan Mukta, abides more and more deeply that person begins to emit what the Christians call the odor of sanctity. Doesn't mean they smell good. It means their vibrational nature has changed. They become attractive in a way that has nothing to do with what they look like, even what they say. So we have great historical examples like St. Francis of Assisi, where the wild animals would come to him. A more recent example, Ramana Maharshi, same thing. People would desire to be in his presence. Animals would too. On a more mundane example, you see a dog, and if a person walks up to the dog and they have fear or some aggression, the dog may respond by "Arr." But you see a 3 or 4 year old child who has no fear. They just want puppy. The dog is not frightened by it. So we begin to carry this sense of blessedness with us through the world. And yet, a person of steady wisdom is not attached to the various people in his or her life. We need to learn to love as God loves. And I like to say, God has no taste. God loves people you and I might have nothing to do with. We may not be able to love everyone, but at least we can come to some neutrality and wish the best as a practice. All right, next one.
Next verse or next idea?
Oh, next idea.
And who is not troubled by the world.
We've already discussed this. Next idea after that.
Who is freed from joy, envy, fear, and anxiety.
Because again, that person's joy is independent of the world. Here, the joy from which he's free is the joy, meaning I got what I want. And it's antithesis. I have anxiety because I didn't get what I want. This is what the Master Jesus meant when he said, my kingdom is not of this world. I bring you peace, a peace the world does not know. I am in the world, but not of it. He kept talking about this over and over again. Person of steady wisdom walks and talks around just like everybody else. But what is day to the man of steady wisdom is night to them. He's got a different playground. And what is day to them? Oh, give me, more, better, different. That is night to the man of wisdom. He has no concern. All right, next one. Next verse.
He who has no expectation is pure, skillful in action, unconcerned, and untroubled, who has renounced all undertaking. He, my devotee, is dear to me.
So again, let's look at these ideas. The first one,
He who has no expectation.
yes. An expectation is sometimes termed as a resentment under construction. The opposite of moving through this world with expectations is the capacity to accept life on life's terms, to be present to what is. What is the definition of acceptance? It's just the acknowledgement of a material fact. Now, of course, we have surface expectations. I have an expectation when I switch on the light will go on. But if there's been a power outage, no light, I have to accept it. Next idea.
Is pure.
Yes. Again, pure here doesn't mean a goody-goody. Doesn't mean he bathes 3 times a day, although he might. Pure water means water with nothing else in it. So here, purity means reducing the frequency and the volume of thought. Inside, he's shunyata, empty. Next idea.
Skillful in action.
Oh, this is a great one. When we move through the world and our actions are not skillful, it's usually because of an agitated mind and we're not present to what's really going on. I remember talking with a student several years ago, and she had a date planned. And she had mapped out in her mind the planned conversation she was going to have with this person. Well, I'm going to say this, and then they're going to say that, and then I'll respond this, and then they're going to say that. They had this very elaborate planned conversation before the date ever happened. That's nuts. Life doesn't work that way. Heard several slogans. One of my favorites: man proposes, but God disposes. No battle plan survives contact with the enemy. I think it was Mike Tyson who had the idea, oh, people have all sorts of plans of how they're going to fight me until I punch them in the face. That's life. So skillful means has as its root a quiet mind. The quiet mind is the most perceptive mind and the mind that will intuitively grasp what needs to be done or said. Doesn't mean we don't make plans, but be willing to drop them at any moment. Yoga is skill in action, Krishna will say. because the quiet mind is the most perceptive and the most powerful. Next idea.
Unconcerned and untroubled.
Yes. Very practically speaking, there's so many people who are just hand-wringing about politics on both sides. We certainly do live in fascinating times. May have a preference, but it's all ultimately in Ishvara's hands. I don't know what's going to happen. But can you watch the news without getting upset? Can you listen to someone who disagrees with you without getting upset? And this lack of being troubled comes from this deep, direct experience. It's all Brahman. I of myself do no thing. It is the Father within that doeth the work. That's how Jesus. Absolutely nothing happens in God's universe by mistake. That doesn't mean tragedies don't happen, but they are largely the result of the ignorance and the subsequent pain, violence human beings do to one another. We want to do always is be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Return good for evil, Jesus. Next idea.
Who has renounced all undertaking.
This doesn't mean the man of steady wisdom sits around doing nothing. The undertakings that Krishna is talking about are ego-prompted activities. What do we mean? You will work. The dharma of the body is karma. Body's work. Do your duty. But give up the idea. The problem with my life is this is wrong. I'm in the wrong place. I'm with the wrong person. I'm in the wrong job. I've got to change everything, or at least some things. That'll make it better. Classic example, what we call in AA, a geographic. Person lives in Chicago and they get drunk. Their friends hate them. They lose their job and they run up the credit cards. Oh, it's Chicago. I'm going to move to LA. It'll be so much better in LA. And get to LA, and guess what they brought with them? Their mind. In a short period of time, the same circumstances there. So if I am restless, irritable, discontent, and I feel that my life isn't working, it's probably not the external circumstances. So what yoga invites us to do, come to a point of neutrality with our circumstances. If we can get to the point where we're no longer reacting, and back to what we talked about with skillful means, we'll know what to do. Next idea.
That's it.
Okay, we'll end here. What verse are we on for next week?
We're on page 53, the third verse.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om.